Iran, one of the oldest countries, and America, one of the youngest. Iran, located in the middle of Eastern Hemisphere, and America in the middle of Western Hemisphere. The time difference between them is almost 12 hours. The governments of these two countries have been the greatest friends at one point in time, but at another point, the biggest enemies. In the recent history, the relationship between Iran and the United States has been one of the most talked about issues of the world community and has affected many other issues either directly or indirectly. Before World War II, Iran and the United States did not have any diplomatic relation. But we go back further in time to investigate the background of this love-hate relationship from the time of the United States independence. When George Washington became the first president of the United States, Agha Muhammad Khan took the control of the central government in Iran and founded the Qajar dynasty. After him, Fath Ali Shah ruled Iran from 1797 to 1834, during the time of the presidencies of John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, James Monroe, John Quincy Adams, and Andrew Jackson. After Fath Ali Shah, Muhammad Shah reigned from 1834 to 1848 during the time of these US presidents: Andrew Jackson, Martin Van Buren, William Henry Harrison, John Taylor, and James Polk. Then Nasruddin Shah became king from 1848 to 1896. His ruling was coinciding with these US presidents: Zachary Taylor, Maral Pilva, Franklin Pierce, James Buchanan, Abraham Lincoln, Andrew Jackson, Ulysses Grant, Rutherford Hayes, James Garfield, Chester Arthur, Glover Cleveland, Benjamin Harrison, and William McKinley. First Iranian who came to the United States was Mirza Muhammad Ali, known as the Traveler, who became a US citizen in 1875. He was able to meet with President Grant a few times too. He returned to Iran in 1877. The first Americans who went to Iran were the evangelists of Presbyterian Church. They went to Iran in connection with Iranian Assyrians and Armenians in 1970s during the Nasruddin Shah's time. Later on, they founded the American Memorial School in Tabriz. After the assassination of Nasruddin Shah in 1897, Muzaffaruddin Shah was king for 8 years, coinciding with the presidencies of William McKinley and Theodore Roosevelt. The first historical event that connected Iran and America happened during the Iranian Constitution Revolution. Howard Baskerville was a young 22-year-old American who had graduated from Princeton University in theology. He headed to Iran to teach English in the American Memorial School. He was witness to the battles between the freedom fighters and the government forces, and could not stay neutral. in spite the warnings from the American consulate that he was not allowed to interfere with the internal affairs of the host country. He actively sided with the freedom fighters and even took part in the battles and finally lost his life in that way. On April 19, 1909, the day of the final battle between the freedom fighters and the government, he was the first getting killed. The day after that, Tabriz held his funeral in a grand way. People of Tabriz wove his portrait on a fine Persian rug and sent it to his mother along with his rifle. On his rifle, this sentence was engraved: "Killed for our freedom." After the constitution was signed into law by Muzaffareddin Shah, Iranian parliament, called Majlis, decided to hire an economic advisor from one of the Western countries to balance the 1907 fiscal budget. An American named Morgan Schuster was chosen for the job. But his presence in Iran was not well received by the Russians and the British, who had dominated Iran for centuries. After signing the 1907 St. Petersburg Treaty, Russia and Great Britain divided Iran into two parts for their own dominations. As the working conditions got harder for Morgan Schuster, he left his job halfway done and got back to the US. After the complete victory of the Constitution Revolution, Majlis invited Schuster back to Iran again. But due to the pre-World War I condition, he was not able to execute his plans. Another American who was in love with Iran and had a special place in Iranians' hearts was Professor Arthur Pope. After he got his higher education degrees from 3 different universities in archaeology, he went to Iran during the presidency of FDR in 1925 to pursue his archaeological research in Iran. He played a major role in forming nationalistic ideas in Reza Shah's thoughts. Arthur Pope organized and held the Persian exhibition in Philadelphia in 1927. He spent all of his life introducing the Persian art and civilization to the world. However, he died of heart attack in 1969 during his research in Iran. He was buried in the banks of Zayanderud River in Isfahan as stated in his will. In forming relation between Iran and any country in recent history, oil plays the major role. The first country who entered Iran in search of oil was Britain. In 1901, William Darcy purchased the rights for oil explorations from Muzaffareddin Shah by paying £20,000 and 16% royalty fee. The contract includes all of Iran's soil except the 5 northern provinces of Azerbaijan, Gilan, Mazandaran, Asterabad, and Kurdistan. The area covered in that oil contract was over 1,200,000 square kilometers. That opportunity was the foundation for the growth of Anglo-Persian Oil Company, which today we know it as BP. Because of Russia's domination in the northern parts of Iran, those 5 provinces were supposed to go to them. But the 1917 social revolution changed the scenario, and the new Soviet government decided to end their domination in Iran and evacuated the north. At the end of the Great War, the victors gathered at the Versailles Convention. During the convention, Americans requested to hold a special meeting for the future of Iran and its oil reserves, but Great Britain opposed it. Later, America realized Britain had already initiated talks with Iran about new oil contracts for the northern provinces, and that was the reason for the refusal of having the special meeting at the convention. US vigorously objected to the secret talks between Britain and Iran. In the first session of Majlis after the war, which was held after 6 months, the representatives openly opposed any new contracts with the British oil companies, and the road was getting paved for the American oil companies to come to Iran. At that time, Iran's economy was in a dire situation and in need of loans to get the economy moving. Iran's envoy in Washington relayed the message to American officials that Iran is interested in signing oil contracts with American companies. At that time, the United States was looking for new oil resources too. The domestic reserves were depleting fast, and it needed new oil fields to explore outside of their own borders and Mexico. American government welcomed Iran's interest and ordered its representatives in Tehran to satisfy the needs of American oil companies to start the work in Iran. Standard Oil Company stepped forward and offered Iran whatever Anglo-Persian Oil Company had offered for the oil exploration in the northern provinces. On November 22, 1921, Majlis voted unanimously to enter into a 50-year contract with Standard Oil. Iran was to receive $5 million as a loan to start its economic programs. But the American oil company needed to secure its loan with something besides the oil royalties that it was supposed to receive from the deal. Iran suggested the royalty payments that was receiving from Anglo-Persian Oil Company as a means of securing the loan. As soon as the British company got the news about the deal that its payments are used as a means of security for another oil deal, it expressed its discontent to the United States and stopped the royalty payments to Iran. Standard Oil found its loan without any sufficient backing and cancelled the contract with Iran. Then, American and British oil companies decided to explore together for oil in that area, but Majlis did not agree and again claimed that there was too much British domination over Iran. In desperation to deal with a non-British oil company, Iran suggested Sinclair Oil to sign a contract without any loans involved. Sinclair Oil agreed and started negotiations with Iran. As the talks over details of the deal were going on, a disturbing news reached the parties involved in the deal. One of the American consulate named Robert Embry was shot and killed in one of Tehran's streets. After receiving that news, Sinclair's interest in any oil deals with Iran dissipated rapidly, and it backed away from any presence in Iran. America was realizing that it cannot send its oil companies to Iran without providing protection for them first, and before anything else, America needed to have a strong diplomatic relationship with Iran. So, the United States ended its quest for oil in Iran at that time. After that period, American presence in Iran was at a minimum level. Its presence was limited to some individuals like Professor Pope, who was continuing his research. Another individual which had an active presence in Iran was Arthur Milspa, who was a State Department financial advisor and was invited to Iran by the government to help to improve the economy from the post-war depression. He entered Iran in 1922 and spent 5 years as an advisor. He had some success in collecting tax on basic items like sugar in order to build the North-South Railroad. But at the end, he was not able to overcome the old bureaucratic structure. Another problem was Reza Shah was asking for a larger budget for the army, and Milspa was not agreeing with it. He returned to the United States in 1927. During his stay in Iran, he wrote a book named The American Task in Iran and published it after his return. In later years, that book became the major guideline for American policies in Iran. Arthur Milspa returned to Iran in 1941 for his second time as the manager of an economic plan suggested and aided by the U.S. State Department. But with World War II going on and the political chaos of 11 cabinets between 1941 to 1946, he was not able to do much. He returned to Washington in 1945. Now we take you back to 1920s again. With Russians leaving the northern provinces and no chance of American oil companies present in Iran, Great Britain became the only foreign power in Iran. In Reza Shah's time, the government turned to Germany to create a balance of foreign powers in Iran. Germany was becoming an industrial giant, and the relation between Iran and Germany grew rapidly. Many vital construction projects were successfully finished. This cooperation went as far as Germany having about 1,000 engineers and advisors in Iran, which by far was more than any other country. However, that became a cause of concern for allies in World War II, even though Reza Shah had declared neutrality in the war. But the Allied forces were not convinced. On top of that, they needed the south-north Iran's railways for logistic purposes. In a coordinated plan in September 1941, Soviet forces from the north and British forces from the south crossed the borders and entered into Iran. Reza Shah abdicated the throne and his son Muhammad Reza became the new king. In that transfer of power, Iranian former Prime Minister Muhammad Ali Foroughi played a major role, and many refer to him as the architect of the plan. Muhammad Ali Foroughi became the first Iranian ambassador to the United States after World War II. He was not only a skilled politician, he also played a big role in the cultural arenas. In November 1943, leaders of the Allied forces, FDR, Churchill, and Stalin, went to Tehran to participate in Tehran Conference. Each of them held a separate meeting with the young king too. After the end of World War II, a new era started in the relationship between Iran and the United States, especially with the events right after the war. After the war, Allied forces were supposed to evacuate Iran. British forces left the south, but Soviet Union refused to leave the north and started to strengthen the Azerbaijan Democratic Party. Jafar Pishevari, the party leader, with its own flag and its capital in Tabriz, and the support of Soviet Communist Party, declared Azerbaijan independent from Iran. By that time, Harry Truman was in the White House, and the Cold War was starting. In fact, Azerbaijan was the first showdown of the Cold War between the two superpowers. The United States started its military aid to Iran and called the Soviet presence in northern Iran unacceptable. In later years, Truman said, "I personally made sure that Stalin got my message that if he would not pull his forces out of Iran, he would be facing American military might in Azerbaijan." The Red Army had to evacuate Iran along with the leadership of Azerbaijan Democratic Party. As a result of that conflict, the young king got a lot of credit and good reputation for staying with the United States during the conflict. The later evidence was proving that Stalin had plans to separate all the northern provinces from Iran. America's search for oil in Middle East finally paid off. In February 1945, FDR, just a few months before his death, aboard an American Navy ship in Suez Canal, signed a historic oil contract with Saudi's King Malik Abdulaziz. Compared with the Anglo-Iranian oil contracts, these contracts were giving much greater share to the host country. This share, in some cases, reached to 50%. As the news of these contracts reached Iran, all the political parties and groups in Iran demanded a bigger share of the oil income from British companies. But the Anglo-Iranian oil companies' answer to these demands was negative. In the beginning of Mohammad Reza Shah's ruling, two political parties started to gain power in Iran. The Communist Party and the National Front, and both were objecting to the oil contracts. As the British oil company rejected the request to rewrite the contracts, both of these parties started to promote an oil nationalization movement and pressure the government to take control of the oil fields and the refineries. In March 1951, Iranian Prime Minister Razmarah gave a lecture in Majlis opposing the oil nationalization, claiming Iran would lose its credibility by not respecting the oil contracts. A few days after that speech, Razmara was assassinated by a 26-year-old named Khalil Tahmasbi. He was one of the members of a group called the Islamic Fadais, founded by Nawab Safavi. After the Razmara's assassination, the political atmosphere entered a new phase. Just after a few days, oil nationalization bill was passed in Majlis, and 1 month later, with the vote of 79 to 12, Mohammad Mossadegh was voted the new prime minister. From the first days as prime minister, he was able to ride the wave of oil nationalization movement, which had been started by all the political groups, and he was perceived as the hero of the oil nationalization. On May 1st, 1951, Mossadegh sent 5 representatives to Khuzestan province to take over the oil industry from the British Oil Company. At the last moment, Anglo-Iranian Oil agreed with the 50-50 deal, but it was too late. Iranian oil was nationalized and Iranian government refused any further talk with the British. Anglo-Iranian Oil pulled out all of its employees from Iran, and Great Britain started a blockade on the Iranian oil. The British Oil Company asked other oil companies to boycott Iranian oil, and they all agreed, even though oil companies are in competition, but in a way they are united to strengthen the oil industry, and boycott of Iranian oil was an example of it. Iranian oil production was reduced from 240 million barrels to only 10 million barrels a year. Therefore, Mossadegh's government was under tremendous economic pressure. Churchill asked Truman for help to bring down Mossadegh's government from power, but Truman refused and urged Britain to take their case to the International Court in Hague. British government filed a complaint against Iran for breaching the oil contracts, which were valid till 1993. But the International Court refused to take the case and saw it out of its jurisdiction. By reaching this news to Iran, Mossadegh became the unquestionable oil nationalization hero. His popularity crossed the borders, and he became a symbol of resistance against imperialism in the Middle East region. He became Time magazine Man of the Year and was invited to America. In his trip to the States, he was received warmly with great interest by many American officials. He had a very friendly visit with Truman too. It seemed the United States and Mossadegh were building a foundation for a long-lasting friendship, but the future events would prove it was not the case. At that time, Britain could not do anything else and just had to wait for the result of the coming presidential election and hope Eisenhower would win so they could make the same offer to the new president too. remove Mossadegh from power. British hope came true and Eisenhower won the election. He was not quite settled in the White House that he received the British offer for a joint plan to overthrow Mossadegh from power. In convincing Eisenhower to overthrow Mossadegh, his involvement with the Communist Tudeh Party was greatly exaggerated, and he was shown as a person willing to cooperate with the Russians, especially with the dire economic situation that the government of Iran was facing. In desperation, Mossadegh sent a message to Eisenhower that Iran is willing to sell oil to the United States with a 40% discount. But Eisenhower could not go against the oil consortium. Iran's political and economical situation was going towards chaos, and danger of Soviet Union gaining influence was convincing Eisenhower to accept the British plan to overthrow Mossadegh. A secret project with codename Boot was offered to CIA by MI6 in November 1952, when Truman was still the president. Kermit Roosevelt, in charge of CIA Middle East branch, and CIA Deputy Allen Dulles were informed and had reviewed the plan. After Eisenhower was elected as president, Allen Dulles became the head of CIA and his brother John Foster Dulles became the Secretary of State. Everything was ready to go. As soon as Eisenhower gave his approval, the plan was put into action. Such a plan and its execution up until then was unprecedented in the history, and in case of success was going to open a new era in CIA activities.
And Foster Dulles went around the table, and the only person on the State Department side whom I can remember taking any kind of a very specific
In March 1953, MI6 and CIA held a meeting and reviewed the plan and made some final adjustments to it, and also changed the name of the operation from Boot to Ajax, and received the final approval from their governments. The plan consisted of 4 parts. First, create a pro-communist image of Mossadegh for the public. Second, help Mossadegh opposition to create an atmosphere of chaos and unrest. Third, put pressure on Shah to dismiss Mossadegh as the prime minister for the unrests. Fourth, install General Zahedi as the new prime minister and impose martial law. On August 1st, General Norman Schwarzkopf entered Iran with suitcases containing unspecified amount of dollar bills, and held meetings with Shah and Zahedi, and assured them of 100% US backings. Following him, Kermit Roosevelt flew to Tehran and held a meeting with Shah and informed him of Ajax plan. Then, by paying up key individuals in big cities of Iran, the propaganda and connecting Mossadegh to the party started. Shah ordered the dismissal of Mossadegh for mismanagement. The order is carried by some military officials, accompanied by a group of soldiers to the Mossadegh's house so that it could be handed or be read to him. But Mossadegh guards and his supporters stopped them from entering the house and were able to chase them away. Mossadegh gained the upper hand and his supporters demanded General Zahedi's arrest. He took refuge in American embassy. As soon as Shah received the news, he left the country and CIA started to pull his men out of Iran. But in those critical moments, Kermit Roosevelt did not give up and came up with a new plan. And according to himself, by spending about $50,000, was able to hire some mobs to act as members of the party and started a violent demonstration in Tehran. They destroyed public buildings, mosques, and pulling down the Shah's statue, while chanting, "Long live Mossadegh." At the same time, CIA was paying up the law enforcement officials not to interfere with the ongoing events. On August 19, the following day of the operation, the same mobs who were demonstrating against the Shah and supporting Mossadegh were in the streets, this time demonstrating for the Shah and against Mossadegh. They headed for the Mossadegh's house and the police did not interfere with them as it was planned. CIA plan was that the final demonstration got the most attention and was successful in doing that. As the demonstrators got closer to the Mossadegh's house, some military forces joined them too and started to shoot at Mossadegh's house. He was able to escape from the back door. His guards and his supporters started to fight back, but they were not able to resist and they lost a one-sided battle. At the end, about 300 got killed from both sides. Later in the day, General Zahedi is taken to the national radio station and gave the news of the victory of the Shah supporters and declared himself as the new prime minister and enforced a martial law. Mossadegh realized it was too late to do anything and gave himself up to the government forces. While all of this was going on in Iran, Shah was in Italy. He returned to Iran after a few days and continued his reign, but differently. By using the martial law in place, many of the opposition leaders were arrested and were sentenced by military courts, and some of the Communist Tudeh party members were executed. After the coup, the oil consortium took the task of dividing the oil contracts. 40% United States, 40% Great Britain, 14% Netherlands, and 6% France. The contracts started in 1954, valid for 25 years, ending in 1979, exactly the year of Islamic Revolution in Iran. From then on, Shah became the popular man of the region, and the relationship between Iran and America became more colorful than ever. That relationship was expanding in all areas of culture, business, academic, and of course, military. Names like Cadillac, Pontiac, Chevy, Jeep, Mac, Kodak, Westinghouse, GE, BF Goodrich, Lee, Levi's, Pepsi-Cola, and Coca-Cola became household names in Iran. With the help of Pan Am, Iran Air was founded and became the best airline of the region. The volume of the construction projects by American companies reached into billions of dollars. Among those projects, 3 refineries in Tehran, Tabriz, and Isfahan. Pahlavi University of Shiraz was founded with the cooperation of the University of Chicago. Ariamer University was founded with the help of MIT. Isfahan Institute of Technology started by choosing University of Pennsylvania as a model, and tens of thousands of Iranian students went to the United States for higher education. Shah sent thousands of Iranians to the United States to receive training in American Air Force bases to become pilots. By 1978, Iranian Air Force had become a powerful force with 5,000 pilots and 450 fighter planes, all of them American-made, and was the biggest in the region after the Israeli Air Force. At that time, Iranian Air Force had 14 air bases all over Iran, in Tehran, Isfahan, Shiraz, Desful, Hamadan, Ahvaz, Bushehr, Bandar Abbas, and Chabahar. In the late 70s, Bell Helicopter was assembling its Cobras in Isfahan, and Boeing had signed a contract with Iran for the delivery of 7 AWACS advanced radar planes. During the Kennedy's and Johnson's presidencies, the relation with Shah continued to be warm, but the relation between Shah and the Republican Party was something else. We have to remember, it was Eisenhower who approved the coup in Iran. During the presidency of Richard Nixon, the friendship between Iran and America reached its highest point. In particular, the friendship between Shah and Henry Kissinger was noticeable. In those years, Iran was called the police of Middle East. To prove his power, Shah sent his army to Oman to help the government fighting the communist guerrillas in Zofar. The clear advantage of Iran's military over Iraq's forces made Saddam to have second thoughts about starting a war over the Arvand-Rud border conflict. Also, Shah had a close relation with OPEC and its oil ministers, especially with Zaki Amani of Saudi Arabia. Their cooperation made OPEC a stronger organization. Even though Shah owed his throne to the United States and Great Britain and their oil companies, but by the early 70s he had gained so much power that he was changing his views towards those two countries. In a few TV network interviews, he openly criticized both America and Great Britain openly. In 1973, in a news-making lecture, he warned the oil consortium that Iran was not going to renew the oil contracts with them in 1979, and they would have to rewrite the contracts. Many political experts called that lecture the beginning of an end for the Shah's ruling. But many others refer to the internal conflicts within Iran as the reason for his demise. As he was getting more powerful, he disassembled all the political parties and replaced them with one single party named Rastakhi's. He also was giving too much power to Savak, his secret police. As the political atmosphere was getting tighter, underground guerrilla organizations of Fadais with communist ideologies and Mujahids with Islamic ideas were formed in Iran. The Fadais had ties with Tudeh Party and Soviet Unions, and that was a cause of concern for the United States, which was still in the midst of the Cold War, and naturally was not happy to see communist groups to resurface in Iran. The main reason for 1953 coup was that America believed Mossadegh was soft on communists. Shah was facing another problem too. The students who left Iran for higher education in Western countries were turning against him, and by telling the story of the political prisoners in the Savak's jails, were painting a different picture from the Shah in Europe and the United States. The height of the Iranian students opposing Shah was in the Carter's time. In the Shah's last trip to US as the King of Iran, the events unfolded in a peculiar way for him. His supporters had already gotten the permit to gather on the south side of the White House. So Andy Shah's protesters had to settle for demonstrating on the opposing side. At the moment that Shah and Carter were lecturing in front of the South Lawn, where Shah supporters were gathered, somehow a few hundreds of anti-Shah's protesters got the permit to march there. That was enough to start a fight. The riot police forces started to fire tear gas to stop the fight that they had created it themselves. The wind carried the tear gas towards Shah and Carter, and they got a dose of that too. Tearful eyes of Shah and Carter was the headline of all the news networks that night. As a result, Shah's prestige was damaged greatly. A few months after that, Carter was invited to Iran. In the state dinner in that trip, Carter called Iran island of stability. But that statement was not true anymore. The scene of Shah and Carter toasting champagne in a country with Islamic traditions was a testimony to the fact that how far Shah was from the reality of what was going on in the society. By that time, the wind of crisis had started to blow, and only a person closing his eyes to that reality was not able to see that. At that time, human rights was a major topic in the United States. Even though the Carter's human rights campaign was part of the Cold War against the Soviets, but Shah got caught in it because of his secret police reputation of torturing political prisoners. The news making Barbara Walters' interviews with the Shah was portraying him as a bloody dictator. But the future events would prove that by nature Shah was not a Machiavellist ruler and would never order a mass killing of his people to stay in power. Meanwhile, the leftist organization of Fadais was getting a lot of attention, especially among the university students. America was getting concerned about the communists' influence in Iran and whether Shah can stop that from growing. Meanwhile, the demonstrations were gathering momentum. It started with small numbers but rapidly grew into waves of people in the streets of Iran. Many could not believe the number of people fighting for their beliefs. As the opposition to the Shah was getting stronger, United States started to look into the spectrum of the forces against the Shah to find out who would be the best for the United States interest in case of Shah's downfall. One thing was for certain: America would never support any of the communist groups. The other alternative was the Islamic groups. They not only were able to overthrow the Shah, but also able to eradicate all the communist organizations in Iran. Very soon, it was clear to everyone that the person who would turn the pages of Iran's future was Ayatollah Khomeini. In a desperate search to find a solution to calm the situation, Shah started to create reforms. He freed all the political prisoners and lifted censorship from the press. In those days, American National Security Advisor Brzezinski was advising Shah to stop the reforms and try to stop the uprisings. But Shah responded, "I will continue the reforms to a level that one day people will not find anything to protest against." But soon he found out it was not a good strategy either, and said, "Now time is against me. Reforms bring me more demonstrations, and stopping the protesters causes more uprisings." In order to stop demonstrations, Shah even went as far as arresting and jailing his former longtime Prime Minister Hoveyda, and used him as a scapegoat for all the government corruptions. But that did not work either, and the unrest continued. After Hoveyda, Amuzegar and Sharif Emami became prime ministers, but the political crisis continued and got even worse. By then, Ayatollah Khomeini was the center of all the attentions. He was residing in Najaf, Iraq at the time, being busy giving daily lectures, supporting the movement and condemning the Pahlavi dynasty. He was rapidly getting the support of different sectors of the society, especially the merchants of Bazar. The unprecedented daily coverage of BBC radio from the daily events in Iran helped to sustain the crisis. Millions of people were tuning their shortwave radios to BBC to get the latest news and their analysis. Because Ayatollah Khomeini was getting too much attention in his residence in Iraq, Saddam ordered him to leave the country. Some believe Shah asked Saddam to oust him, and others believe Saddam was already nervous from the big gatherings of Shiites in Najaf. But it worked out even better for Ayatollah Khomeini. Immediately, he received an invitation from France. He and his entourage entered France and resided in Neufchâteau, a suburb of Paris. With more access to press now, Khomeini is able to lead the movement much better. Many of his followers rushed to Paris to join him, and the future government of Iran was being formed in that Paris suburban town. On top of all the challenges Shah was facing, he had to deal with cancer from inside too. He had been diagnosed with lymphoma, but it was kept secret from the public. Time was truly against him from all fronts. In his memoir he wrote, "Many of my close friends, who were the last to leave the evening parties held at the royal palaces, were the first to leave the country. In the last months of his ruling, fear and loneliness had cast a shadow on his palaces. Around that time, the United States decided to evacuate and destroy its radar stations in north of Iran. They were used to monitor south parts of Soviet Union." Another devastating news to the Shah was when he was informed that General Heiser, deputy commander of NATO forces, had been in Tehran for meetings with the top generals without visiting the Shah. By receiving that news, he realized his days were numbered. The purpose of the meeting was to convince the Shah's general to stay neutral in the conflict. They agreed, but they didn't know they were agreeing on their own execution. Majority of them were executed by the Revolutionary Court right after the revolution. At that time, William Sullivan was the ambassador to Iran. Following General Heiser's visit, the ambassador contacted the Shah and let him know that the American government believed that it was better for him to leave the country temporarily. William Sullivan personally participated in the street demonstrations before the revolution. "The worst day of my life was the day I was leaving Iran," Shah expressed later. On a cold January day of 1979, he and Queen Farah left Iran forever to go to Egypt. With the departure of Shah, euphoria among the Shah's opposition reached its highest. The headlines of major newspapers were short and clear: "Shah is gone." Before leaving the country, Shah appointed Bakhtiyar as prime minister, hoping he would do something to calm the situation in those perilous moments of Iran's history. But it was too late for Bakhtiyar to do anything. In the statement released by the government, Shah was leaving the country for a short vacation, but it was clear for everyone that the Shah would never come back to Iran. With the absence of Shah from Iran, the situation got even more out of control for the government. People in high positions and strong ties to the Pahlavi dynasty who were still in Iran rushed to leave the country, and the stage was being set for Ayatollah Khomeini's arrival. On February 1st, 1979, the leader of the revolution entered Iran by the infamous Air France Paris to Tehran flight. The pilot walked him down the stairs step by step till he put his foot on Iran's soil after 15 years of absence. The Air France flight by many was called the Flight of Light, and some called it the flight which was lost in time for 1,000 years. When Ayatollah Khomeini entered the country, Shah's regime was still formally in power. In his first lecture in Iran, Ayatollah Khomeini made it clear to his followers what they should do to the government still in power. "We kick them in the mouth." From the moment Khomeini entered the country, Iran had two governments, Bakhtiyar's and Khomeini's. But that situation did not take more than 10 days. On February 11, 1979, Ayatollah Khomeini's followers attacked the military bases, government buildings, and most importantly, the national TV and radio broadcasting buildings, and took the control of them. On that fateful day, the Pahlavi dynasty was formally overthrown after ruling the country for 57 years, and the famous Victor Hugo's sentence proved its truth to the Iranian society too. Nothing is more powerful than the idea that its time has come. After the Islamic Republic took over the power, the United States started to make relations with the new government. Many of the top officials in the government were educated in the United States, and it was a good opportunity for the US to approach these individuals. For instance, Qutbzadeh, which had gone to Georgetown University and was holding the key position of head of national TV and radio, or Ebrahim Yazdi, Secretary of Foreign Affairs, who was also educated in the United States and had founded the Islamic Council of Houston, Texas. In the months after the revolution, American embassy in Tehran was functioning somewhat normal and was handling more than normal visa applications. Many, not sure of the future of Iran, were trying to leave the country. But the diplomatic relationship was not normal yet. Iranian government was still blaming the US for the 1953 coup and was expecting the US government to return the Shah to Iran for trial. After Shah left Iran, he arrived in Egypt and was welcomed warmly by Anwar Sadat, and from there he went to Morocco, Bahamas, and Mexico. During that time, signs of gallbladder were shown in him. He was recommended to go to Switzerland for treatment and surgery, but he insisted on going to the United States to receive the treatment, thinking his relation with the US was still the same. Jimmy Carter reluctantly issued the permit for his entrance to US for medical treatment. But when he was admitted to the New York hospital, other complications prevented the surgery to be performed, and he had to wait 6 weeks for the treatments before the surgery. Using that opportunity, Islamic Republic demanded his extradition to Iran for trial, but the United States refused. That was enough of a reason for the Khomeini's hardline followers to do something in retaliation. On November 4, 1979, a big number of them climbed the walls and gates of the US Embassy in Tehran, occupied the building, and captured 53 US Embassy staff as hostage, and used them as a leverage to bring the Shah back to Iran. US government asked Shah to leave. On December 15, 1979, Shah left the US for Panama. 48 hours after he entered Panama, an Iranian government envoy with a 450-page long dossier entered Panama demanding the extradition of Shah to Iran. Government of Panama refused and asked Shah to leave. At that moment, Shah had no place to go. In an interview with David Frost, explaining his situation, he said, "Only Shakespeare can put this tragedy into words." But in the midst of all the bad news, he received a warm invitation from Anwar Sadat, expressing to him that Egypt always welcomed him and their friendship was not only for the happy days. Queen Farah wrote in her memoir that Sadat's invitation was the only good news they received after they left Iran. Shah finally found the chance to receive treatment, but his cancer was already too advanced. It was too late for any treatment. On July 27, 1980, Shah passed away at the age of 60. Sadat held a state funeral for him. He was buried in Al-Refahi Mosque, where Malik Farouk, former Egyptian king and former Shah's brother-in-law, was buried. Richard Nixon was the only person from the United States participating in the funeral. After Shah's death, the hostages were still being kept captive. US government was facing the serious problem of how to free the hostages. No diplomatic language was working. Desperate for finding a solution to release the hostages, Carter approved the execution of the Operation Eagle Claws to free the hostages. In the darkness of late hours of April 23, 1980, the operation got underway. 8 RH-53 helicopters, 3 EC-130 military airplane tankers, and a Hercules C-130 were assigned for the operation. The planes took off from Oman and the helicopters from the deck of a US carrier in Persian Gulf. First, the Hercules C-130 flew to the secret destination named Desert One, 200 kilometers southeast of Tehran, taking all the equipment needed for the mission, followed by the helicopters. Shortly afterwards, the 3 EC-130 with extra fuel for the helicopters arrived at the point of rendezvous. While flying over Persian Gulf, 2 of the helicopters faced electrical problems. Another obstacle surfaced when they were landing. The dust created by the helicopter's propellers brought the visibility to 0, and they could not see what is next to or under them. Because of rough landing, one of the helicopters got a mechanical problem too. With only 5 helicopters to continue, they requested to abort the mission. President Carter, who was following the mission carefully, approved the request. But the worst was yet to happen. When the first helicopter took off to fly back to Persian Gulf, because of the dust problem and low visibility, it slammed into one of the EC-130s, full of fuel, and both exploded instantly. The explosion was so powerful that it reached to another EC-130 and exploded that one too. In that explosion, 8 American commandos got killed. The mission commander ordered to abandon the helicopters, and the rest flew back by the remaining 2 airplanes. Next day, Iranian national radio and television gave the news of the American mission failure and called it an act of God. On the other side, in America, Jimmy Carter appeared on the major TV networks and announced the failure of the covert mission and took the responsibility for it. Following the incident, the Secretary of State, Cyrus Vance, resigned because he was opposing the mission from the beginning. Shortly after that military blunder, Saddam Hussein attacked Iran, some believe by the US provocations. Saddam had been looking for an opportunity to attack Iran for some time to prevent the Islamic Revolution to be exported to Iraq. Exporting the Islamic Revolution started from the first days of revolution to Palestine, Lebanon, and Iraq. On September 22, 1980, Iraq's army started its assault by bombing border cities like Abadan and Qasr Shirin, followed by its air force bombing important targets inside Iran. Iraq was able to advance inside Iran within a short time. But the heroic resistance of all the forces in Iran stopped and pushed them back to their original borders. In June 1982, Iran victoriously celebrated the freedom of the city of Khorramshahr, which was occupied by Iraqi army for more than a year. But the war did not stop there, and Iran decided to continue the war by advancing inside Iraq, to take the control of the Shiite holy cities of Najaf and Karbala. From that point till 1988, for 6 more years, war continued without having a victor. Finally, in June 1988, a ceasefire was declared by the Security Council. Iran-Iraq War is the longest war in the history after the Vietnam War. The casualty number reached 1.2 million and hundreds of billions of dollars in damages to both sides, mostly to Iran. Iran's oil industry never recovered from the damages to its tankers, refineries, and its platforms. The golden province of Khuzestan lost its prosperity forever. Iran-Iraq War started in Carter's time and was continued during the Reagan's presidency without much change in the policies of the US towards the conflict. The major policy was making sure Iran would not win the war. Another area of conflict between Iran and the United States has been the influence of Iran in Lebanon. On April 18, 1983, around 1 p.m., a delivery truck drove towards the American embassy in Beirut. But that time the delivery was a 2,000-pound bomb and a huge explosion. A big portion of the building collapsed and 63 people were killed. 17 Americans, 32 Lebanese, and 14 visitors. Even though it was not proven which group carried the operation, but many experts believed it had the fingerprints of Hezbollah all over it. Hezbollah, then, in its infancy, was just organized and trained by the Islamic Republic of Iran. In October 23rd of the same year, 1983, in the midst of the Lebanese civil war, a truck carrying a bomb with the power of 10,000-pound TNT speeded towards the peacekeeping U.S. Marines compound and exploded on impact. 241 American Marines were killed. That was the bloodiest day for American military after the day of Tet Offensive in height of Vietnam War. Within 2 minutes, another truck with a similar load entered into French peacekeeping compound and performed the same scenario. 58 French soldiers got killed, and French military was facing its bloodiest day since the Battle of Algeria. Following those explosions, there were no doubts left for anybody that the explosions were the work of Hezbollah. Iranian-American relationship deteriorated even further. The United States, in retaliation, started its economic sanctions on Iran, and in response, chants of death to America got louder in Iran. In the midst of all of that, an article was published in one of the Lebanese magazines which became the headline news all over the world. Mehdi Hashemi, one of the senior Iranian Revolutionary Guard members, had given some secret information to Ashira magazine in Beirut, explaining how America had been selling arms to Iran with the help of Israel. In the coming days, the details of the deal were published, explaining how the deals were done. The main reason to sell arms to Iran was not clear at the time, either to keep the war going without a winner, or arms for hostages in Lebanon, or combination of the two. Manucher Horbanifar, an arms dealer icon in Europe, sent the first shipment of arms from Israel to Iran. In return, Iran helped to free some American hostages in Lebanon. This is the way the deals were initiated, but in later stages, Colonel North and Horbanifar were dealing with Iran directly. Horbanifar was adding 40% and Colonel North was adding his own percentage, which was used to buy arms for the Contras, a guerrilla group fighting the government of Nicaragua. This is why the deal, which one end of it was the Contras and the other end Iran, was called Iran-Contra affair. American Congress had cut off aid to Contras earlier, but Colonel North and company were able to provide the Contras with more free arms from the profit that they were making from arms sales to Iran. At that time, Iran was in great need of acquiring those arms. Without it, Iran would have had lost the war to Iraq. The arms deals started in August 1985, and the last shipment was delivered in October 1986. During that time, 2,500 anti-tank tow missiles, 20 anti-aircraft Hawk rockets, plus an specified amount of spare parts were sold to Iran. In the United States, an independent committee was formed, and at the end, many of the members of the administrations, including the president himself, were harshly criticized, and Colonel North and Admiral Poindexter were indicted and convicted. However, at the end, things got back to normal again. Sanctions from the United States and death to America from Iran. In the history of the Iran and the United States relationship, Persian Gulf was the stage of the next events. In 1988, American warship Samuel B. Roberts hit a mine in the waters of Persian Gulf. The ship was saved from sinking. However, in the search of the area, U.S. Navy discovered more mines. Their serial numbers proved they were belonging to Iran. America claimed that Iran had been using the oil platforms for mining operations of the international waterways of the Persian Gulf. Shortly after that, President Reagan approved a military operation named Praying Mantis to stop Iran's mining operations. Only 4 days after the mine explosion, American Navy was present next to Sasan and Siri oil platforms, ready to demolish them. The operation started by giving warnings to the Iranian personnel to evacuate the platforms, otherwise their lives were in danger. After they left the platforms, U.S. warships started to pound them with heavy artillery. The Iranian Navy, with a few small ships and several speedboats, tried to interrupt the operation. But they were far powerless to do anything. One of the Iranian ships and a number of their speedboats were hit and sank. After the operation, American Navy inspected the platforms and found some ammunition and ground-to-air machine guns. Following the incident, Iran filed a complaint against US in the International Court of Justice, but the case was not accepted. Many experts analyzed the harsh reaction of the United States as a sign of its willingness to put an end to the Iran-Iraq war. Even though the relationship between Iran and the United States was already very bad at that time, but the worst was yet to happen. On July 3, 1988, in the last weeks of the Iran-Iraq War, U.S. Vincennes Navy ship, equipped with the latest remote control missile technology, was cruising in the Strait of Hormuz. At the same time, an Airbus 310 Iran Air jetliner was ready to take off from Bandar Abbas to Dubai. After a few minutes into takeoff, it appeared on the Vincennes radar screens. American Navy claimed that the airplane was outside the flight corridor designated for that flight and failed to respond to the warning calls from the US Navy ship to identify itself. Iran denied both of the charges and claimed that the flight was not off course and did not receive any calls demanding identification. The Vincennes Captain William C. Roger deemed the passenger airplane as a hostile enemy and ordered to shoot it down. He claimed he had to protect the lives of his crew members. The missile hit the Iranian passenger airplane, and all the 290 passengers and the crew members were killed. Even though the United States expressed its regret, but that incident became the darkest point in the history of Iran-America relationship. Later, the United States agreed to pay a certain amount to the families of each victim. Less than 3 weeks after that incident, on July 20th, 1988, the Security Council passed the U.S. proposed Resolution 598 to stop the Iran-Iraq war. Saddam accepted it immediately. The resolution was asking both sides of the conflict to return back to their original borders. At that time, Iranian forces were inside Iraq. Iran refused to accept the resolution, but in a short time, Iraq's forces were able to oust Iran's army and even penetrated inside Iran again. Finally, Iran accepted the US Resolution 2 and agreed to end the fight. The number of Iranians killed in the war reached 700,000 and hundreds of thousands more injured. But they were not the only victims. Tens of millions of Iranians were living in the larger cities of Iran and were fearing the Saddam's Scud missiles hitting their homes any moment, were also the victims of the war. They had to carry that horrifying fear for the rest of their lives. Ayatollah Khomeini, who was dreaming of victory over Saddam for years, accepted the peace so unwillingly and compared the signing of the treaty to drinking the cup of poison. Ayatollah Khomeini did not live more than 1 year after accepting the peace with Saddam. He died on June 3, 1989 at 10 p.m. The day after his death, Iran was witnessing the historic mourning of his followers. The leader of the Islamic Revolution was gone. Many of the US foreign policy experts were thinking after Khomeini's death, big changes were on the way for Iran, and maybe the Islamic Republic would not survive, but it was not the case. Sayyid Ali Khamenei became the new leader, and Islamic Republic continued its reign in Iran. After that eventful period of Iran and the United States relationship, Rafsanjani became the new Iranian president. Things started to calm down, and even whispers of normalizing the relation with America could be heard in the Iranian political arenas. Rafsanjani held a few news-making interviews with American TV networks. Many Iranian famous musicians got permissions from both sides to come to the United States to perform. American tourists were able to obtain visas to go to Iran too. In the 8 years of Rafsanjani's presidency, the reformist front started to take form in Iran. Later on, that front was able to elect its clear choice, Mohammad Khatami, by a landslide as the next president. Khatami's presidency was coinciding with Bill Clinton's, who was interested to start a diplomatic relation with Iran too. That mutual interest went as far as almost a face-to-face negotiation. Iranian national wrestling team went to Oklahoma City for a friendly match against the US team. The friendly atmosphere of the wrestling arena reminded the historic ping-pong matches between China and the United States, which broke the ice between those two countries. Many academic and cultural groups were invited to the United States, and coming across an American tourist in Iran would not surprise anyone anymore. In his interview with Christian Amanpour on CNN, President Khatami talked about dialogues among civilizations, in contrast to Clash of Civilizations of Huntington. Muhammad Khatami was able to find many supporters in Europe and the United States in a short time. His lecture in the United Nations General Assembly, expressing his views of peaceful coexistence for all the cultures, made him even more popular among all the world leaders. In August 2000, 4 members of U.S. Congress, Senator Arlen Specter, Bob Ney, Gary Ackerman, and Eliot Engel, had an informal meeting with Iranian Speaker of the House Karoubi and 3 other members of Iranian parliament. Both sides expressed interest in better relationship. That meeting was held during the World Parliament's convention in New York. Secretary of State Madeleine Albright expressed that the 1953 CIA coup in Iran was a mistake and in a way was apologetic about it. It brought new hopes to the people who were interested in diplomatic relations with the United States. But Khatami was not making the final decisions in Iran. He had to convince the hardliners with the leadership of Khomeini, and that was almost impossible because the radical rise to power was on building up the idea of America as the great Satan. On the other hand, in the United States, Bill Clinton was facing impeachment, and he was not able to push for direct talks with Iran anymore, and chance of breakthrough towards better relations disappeared. With the beginning of George W. Bush's presidency and the events of September 11, the path of U.S.-Iran relationship took a turn towards wars, even though Iranian government was among the first to express sympathy and condolence to the U.S. government. Also, many Iranian youth gathered in a popular gathering spot in Tehran and held a candlelight vigil for the September 11th victims. As America was getting prepared to attack Afghanistan to overthrow Taliban, Khatami's government helped the US as much as possible because Taliban were the enemies of Iranian Shiite governments too. Taliban and Al-Qaeda are both belonging to a sector of Islam called Wahhabi. One of their main principles is the vehement animosity towards Shiites. This has been a point that US government repeatedly ignored and never paid enough attention to that fact. In many occasions, US officials and analysts claimed that bin Laden was hiding in Iran, or Iran was providing transit route for Al-Qaeda from Afghanistan to Iran, which none of them had a serious base. The animosity between Taliban and Iranian government is so strong that when Taliban took over the city of Mazar Sharif in Afghanistan, they massacred all the Iranian embassy personnel. Overthrowing Taliban was the best thing that could happen to Iran. That's why Iran was cooperating with the United States. But that cooperation was left unanswered, and instead George Bush put Iran as one of 3 countries that made up the axis of evil, along with Iraq and North Korea. Interestingly, not even one person from 9/11 attackers were from those countries. The reaction to the axis of evil speech in Iran was the same from all the political groups, and they all condemned it. Iranian nuclear activities, which was previously being dealt with as a side issue by the US, was brought into spotlights. American government claimed that Iranian nuclear activities were in the service of making nuclear bomb. Iran was rejecting that claim, saying Iran is trying to use nuclear technology for creating energy and is for peaceful purposes. After defeating the Taliban in Afghanistan, America was looking for more targets in fighting against terrorism. George Bush decided to attack Iraq, but his Vice President Dick Cheney was insisting on attacking Iran instead. He was saying, "We have to cut off the head of terrorism, not its limbs." At the end, he was not able to persuade George Bush. Even though the animosity between Saddam and bin Laden was going back to the days of Iraq's invasion of Kuwait and was clear to everyone, American government claimed Saddam was cooperating with bin Laden. In spite there was no clear clue of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, American government attacked Iraq on these two grounds. On March 20, 2003, American forces, with the help of Great Britain and a small coalition forces, attacked Iraq, and within a few days, Saddam's regime was overthrown. 1 month after the fall of Baghdad in May 2003, Swiss embassy in Tehran, on behalf of Khatami's government, sent a fax to Washington. Political experts called the content of that fax the Great Plan. In that fax, Iran was offering US to enter into a face-to-face negotiation. Iran also was offering its help to fight Al-Qaeda directly, and lastly, Iran was offering its influence in Lebanon to control Hezbollah's activity. Richard Armitage was believing that Khatami's government was offering more than it could deliver, and they could not fulfill these promises. Some sources believe that Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld made sure the offer would not go further and remained unanswered. Some believe US would have had to give legitimacy to Islamic Republic by accepting that offer, which US government was not willing to do at the time. American invasion of Iraq first appeared as an easy victory, but later on some difficulties surfaced, which US had not anticipated. The biggest problem was the roadside bombs, or IEDs, which at first appeared to be isolated incidents, but grew up to become a systematic problem for US forces in Iraq, killing thousands of American servicemen and changing the image of easy victory to a quagmire for the US involvement in Iraq. The IEDs were placed by former Ba'ath Party members still faithful to Saddam and by Al-Qaeda members. Some US military officials claimed Iran's Revolutionary Guard was involved in manufacturing them. That claim, plus the suspicious nuclear activities by Iran, was a good enough ground for Bush administration to attack Iran. But by then, America was facing great difficulties in conducting both wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. The Taliban, which at first were thought to be demolished, were able to revive and started to fight the coalition forces in Afghanistan. Evidence suggests that the US government would have continued its fight against terrorism by attacking Iran had they reached definite victories in Afghanistan and Iraq. In 2003, Iranian government claimed that the US unmanned spy airplanes had entered into its airspace repeatedly. Iran announced 2 of the US spy planes had crashed inside Iran. One of them 37 miles inside Iran and the other one 120 miles inside Iran. The main problem facing George Bush administration in attacking Iran was the result of the public opinion in America. 70% were against any form of war in Iran, either airstrike or sending soldiers. By starting the second term of George Bush presidency, his popularity started to plummet, and he could not sell another war to the Americans. Scott Ritter, UN chemical weapon inspector in Iraq from 1991 to 1998, claimed in 2005 George Bush had given orders to Pentagon to make preparations to attack Iran. The plan was to invade Azerbaijan province first and penetrate into rest of the country from there. Meanwhile, Iranian nuclear program was receiving more scrutiny. The United States was insisting that Iran had breached its NPT obligations, but Iran rejected the claim and responded that its nuclear activities are monitored by IAEA. NPT non-proliferating treaty was signed by 180 countries and Iran and US both are among the signatories. Only 3 countries did not sign the treaty: India, Pakistan, and Israel. The members of NPT agreed not to start a nuclear weapon program, or if they already have the program, do not expand it. IAEA is also a UN agency. Its job is monitoring all the peaceful nuclear programs around the world and makes sure all the safety standards are implemented. IAEA also makes sure the program is not in the service of producing nuclear weapons. So, IAEA has to know how much enriched uranium is produced and make sure all of that is used for producing energy only. That's why IAEA's role is so important in Iran's nuclear case, and that's why the head of this agency, Dr. Al-Baradei, is often in the news in connection with monitoring the Iranian nuclear activities. Iran has hired many former Soviet Union nuclear scientists and has been in contact with A.Q. Khan, the father of Pakistan nuclear bomb. The fact that Iran has vast oil reserves and is second only to Russia in natural gas reserves has raised doubts about the intentions of Iran's nuclear activities. But Iran believes that having nuclear technology is every country's fundamental right. The US government believes that Iran armed with nuclear weapon is dangerous by itself. Plus, it would start a nuclear race in the region, and Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Turkey would seek to have it too. Another concern is the willingness of Iran's fundamentalists to wipe Israel from the face of the earth, as the Iran's hardline president Ahmadinejad expressed many times clearly. Another issue that makes the conflict between Iran and America more complicated is the geography of Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. Iran controls all the northern shores of Strait of Hormuz. America needs to keep it open at all times. 40% of the world's energy comes out of Strait of Hormuz. Every single day, 15 oil tankers leave the Persian Gulf through that narrow waterway, and 15 entered into Persian Gulf from there. On top of that, American military bases in Qatar, Kuwait and Iraq are supplied by US Navy ships going through this waterway too. The problem is that the average depth of Strait of Hormuz is less than 50 meters and big ships can only cruise through a narrow corridor only 3 kilometers on each direction. Some experts on Persian Gulf believe Iran is able to close the Strait of Hormuz by sinking a few of its own ships in those corridors. That's why US has to play the Persian Gulf game very gently. Even though the United States has not been involved in a full-scale war against Iran, but has been trying to weaken the Iranian government by supporting its opposition groups. Scott Ritter, which was mentioned earlier, claimed that MKI, which was still in the list of State Department terrorist groups, was backed by the United States to carry out different operations inside Iran. Following an attack on Iranian law enforcement by the Free Kurdistan Party, Denis Kesenich claimed that America was partly responsible for that because Free Kurdistan Party was conducting its operation from the US-controlled Kurdistan. In April 2007, ABC News reported Jundullah, a Baluchi guerrilla group fighting Islamic Republic forces in Balochistan, is supported by US government. Jundullah is based in Waziristan, Pakistan and is known to have ties to Al-Qaeda and represents the same ideology. Iran had been under US embargo for years, but in 2006, new waves of sanctions were imposed on Iran. The new sanctions were on Iranian banks' international activities. US claim their activities are in service of terrorism. Like the previous sanctions, manufacturing sector and the consumers in Iran had to carry the burden. The manufacturers had to pay more for the raw materials and the machineries they needed for their operations. In December 2007, in the midst of talks and news of possible US attack to Iran, a new assessment was released by US intelligence agencies which decreased the possibility of military intervention to Iran. The new assessment was against George Bush administration's view of Iran's nuclear activities and was explaining Iran's nuclear activities toward making a nuclear weapon had stopped in 2003, and Iran's nuclear programs were solely for creating electricity. The new assessment got a lot of attention and in a way prevented Bush's administration to attack Iran. In January 2009, Barack Obama was sworn in as the new president, even though the new president made it clear that nuclear-armed Iran was not acceptable in any shapes or forms, but tones of his speeches toward Iranian government was softer than his predecessor. In March 2009, a group of representatives from Hollywood traveled to Iran and met with some Iranian filmmakers. They invited them for some joint projects. But Ahmadinejad's art advisors had a few requests They demanded formal apologies for the 1953 coup, supporting Saddam during Iran-Iraq war, and shooting down Iran Air passenger airplane. On the eve of Persian New Year, Obama sent a warm message to Iran. The message was directed to both the people and the government of Iran. In it, Obama expressed that Islamic Republic of Iran would occupy its rightful place in the world community. But first, Iranian government has to behave in a responsible way. Obama's strategy towards Iran was to start a dialogue and move away from confrontation. But first, he had to wait for the June election to find out who he had to deal with. In the weeks leading up to the election, huge number of people were showing their support for Mousavi. The campaign for Mousavi was marked by green flags and started a movement by that name, the Green Movement. In the last hours of the election day, to everyone's surprise, election officials announced Ahmadinejad as the clear winner by a large margin. The day after that, people of Iran in all the cities took their angers to the streets and demonstrated against the results, believing that the election was rigged. The demonstrations continued in next few days. The government forces and Basij militias started to attack the demonstrations violently. The protesters took hundreds of pictures and videos from the brutality of the government forces and posted them on internet. Those pictures shocked the world and all eyes turned to Iran. Among the videos posted on internet, one showed a young Iranian girl getting shot and killed. Her name was Neda, and she became the symbol of the sacrifice Iran is ready to make to get to freedom. In the soccer match between Iran and South Korea, 6 of Iranian players put on green wristbands showing their support for Mousavi. A big number of Iranian actors and artists demanded a new election which could be monitored. Iranian famous filmmaker Mohsen Makhmalbaf, who was in Europe at the time and was in close contact with Mousavi's staff, gave a speech in European Parliament. He announced the occurrence of an election coup in Iran. He also presented them hundreds of videos and pictures so they could decide for themselves. Following the demonstrations inside Iran, all the Iranians living abroad rose up to the occasion too and condemned the violence inflicted by the government. In a press conference, President Obama expressed his outrage from the violence committed by Iranian government forces, but was not as supportive of the protesters as his European counterparts. His reason was that he did not want to create an opportunity for the Iranian government to put the blame on America for the unrest. But Ahmadinejad was putting the blame on foreign forces anyways. The most blame was put on BBC and Voice of America. Many Western journalists believed the way the news of the demonstrations was reported by the Iranian youth was truly historic and a turning point in the way we receive news. At the height of the election uprisings in Iran, when the democratic movement of Iranian youth was desperately searching for a helping hand, President Obama was asked repeatedly about his position on the recent protests in Iran. He responded, "We just have to wait and see how this conflict is going to play out. and how it's going to be resolved among themselves. But many believed, with the degree of the violence inflicted on the peaceful demonstrators by the government, it was clear how it was going to play out. In the past, in dealing with Iran, the United States government has looked into the public opinion of its people too. But the government of Iran has acted as it wished, without considering the will of the people. As a matter of fact, majority of Iranian people, especially the youth, are interested in a normal relationship with the United States. A new parameter has entered into Iran-America equation. The people of Iran, America can benefit far more by recognizing this fact. Without any doubt, the Iranian-American relationship will be the focus of the world community again and again, and the eyes of the world will be on the Iranian people to see how this long absented player is going to play its role.